Hej och välkomna hit. Det finns fortfarande några platser här framme ifall ni vill sitta riktigt nära mig. Varmt välkomna till Timbro. Jag heter Andreas Eriksson och är chef på Timbro Medieinstitut. Och det är jätteroligt att det är så många som har kommit hit till dagens seminarium som vi har döpt till Trump och medierna. Och det visar ju att det här är ett ämne som engagerar många av er. Och jag tror också oroar ganska många av er. Om ungefär ett dygn blir Donald Trump USAs 45:e president. Och han blir det efter en valkampanj där han egentligen hela tiden legat i strid med medierna. Där han anklagat medierna för att vara osakliga, partiska, illvilliga, komma med fejkade nyheter. Och där journalisterna i sin tur har varnat för att Trump innebär inte ett hot bara mot journalistiken utan mot hela demokratin som sådan. Trump i Vita Huset och Trump som USAs president. För några år sedan så tror jag att det hade gjort sig ganska bra som en Halloween-episod i The Simpsons eller någonting bisarrt som låg långt nere på en top 10-list hos David Letterman. Men nu är det vår verklighet från och med imorgon. Och det är nog det som engagerar och väcker väldigt många frågor. Är det så att finns det någon väg framåt överhuvudtaget? Kan man komma bort från den polarisering som har kännetecknat politiken de senaste åren? Eller har vi hamnat i en värld och en tid där sanningen inte spelar någon roll längre? Det tror ju förstås inte jag. Jag tror att sanningen spelar väldigt stor roll. Och det är för att avtäcka lite av den sanningen som vi håller det här seminariet. Och till vår hjälp för att reda ut vad som egentligen hände i USA under förra året, vad som kommer hända nu, så har vi samlat en panel med 4 personer som alla har stor erfarenhet från amerikansk politik och media. Det är Dave Beckwith som är tidigare medarbetare i Time Magazine, också var tidningens Vita Huset-reporter. Han har tidigare varit presschef åt vicepresident Dan Quayle. Peter Slover som ute på fältet bevakat flera presidentvalskampanjer för Dallas Morning Star. Gina Lindberg, utrikeschef på Ekot och mångårig USA-korrespondent för Sveriges Radio. Staffan Erfors, chefredaktör för Realtid Media och tidigare USA-korre för Expressen. Och den som ska sköta diskussionen och hålla ordning på alla frågor, det är Roland Poiré Martinsson från Timbro. Så välkommen upp allesammans, så hoppas jag får en givande lunchtimme. Tack!
All right, take your stance. I will correct that. Okay. Hey, what Andreas said, it's great to see so many people here, and also probably signifies the anticipation and maybe worry as far as what we have ahead of us starting tomorrow. I will give the panel questions for about 50 minutes. After that, questions and answers from the audience. Every time you ask a question, please introduce yourself with name and if you want to, what you represent, since this is also being broadcasted on our web TV. Also, I've been told that we have a book sale out here. Timbro Publishing Company publishes a lot of very good books, and we have a book sale out here. So roam around the facilities after the seminar and see if you can find anything of interest. Also, I want to say that Mr. Pete Slover was working at the Dallas Morning News, not the Dallas Morning. This a reporter till 2004 or something, but during the entire 1990s, you were working in America. Stefan, you have experience from American politics, covering American politics, both from Expressen, but also as a freelance reporter based in Los Angeles. But I'm going to have you represent the decade we're in now, because you're actually editor-in-chief of, I think, one of 2 media outlets in Sweden that began as a web-based media outlet, and in addition to that, also is successful. And here I have to disclose the fact that I'm a bi-weekly columnist for this very news outlet. So if I'm biased, it's because I want to have more readers. So very briefly, and with this I mean 90 seconds or so, what are your thoughts, Dave, between what you have seen now leading up to Trump's presidency and when you made your bones back in the 1980s?
Well, I'm very pleased to be here in Sweden. Thank you for your hospitality. And I'm here representing, I guess, the ghost of Christmas past. But I arrived in Washington in 1971, just before Watergate, and I was on top of Watergate all the way through. By the time I started covering politics in the 80s, things were pretty simple. There were only really 3 networks and a couple of TV channels. There was no social media, no internet, no cable news, and so we were the filter. We in the press were the filter between the government and the public. And if the government wanted to persuade, they had to go through us and convince us first, and then we did it. And even then, though, and so it was a golden age. The publications like Time, nothing like it is today. It was a substantial, heavily reported publication. It was actually worth reading. And expense account abuse was not only tolerated, but actually encouraged. You had all the resources to do anything you wanted. Now, of course, with the internet cutting into the profits of the papers and the magazines and so forth, things are very much more up in the air in the incursion of social media. But even then, we could see the beginnings of certain trends that are more evident today. For example, I remember when Larry Speaks, do you remember that guy? Mm-hmm. He was Reagan's press secretary. He introduced me to the term spin. It was brand new at that point. He took a baseball and he said, I want to give you my spin on this. And of course, spin is now developed into a major art form. Another thing that was just starting then was this tendency to try to go over the press and reach the public directly. And what they would do in those days, it was so simple, they would bypass the White House press corps and they would go to bring in people from around the country who were, quite frankly, a little less caught up in the daily, alarms of the day and were more easy to impress. And that was the beginnings, if you will, of what is now Trump's ability to go directly over. So anyway,
let me interrupt you with a follow-up question, a brief follow-up answer. You said that media at the time functioned as a filter between the electorate and the political system. Today we're talking about post-fact. That filter, was that unbiased? Was that a fair filter, or did it change the message as it filtered it out to the public?
That's a very good question. Everyone has an opinion about things, but people in those days did a much better job of keeping their opinion out of their stories. And I think the major driver when I covered politics in the 80s was sort of anti-establishment. But this year, by now, the press is very partisan.
All right.
Very partisan.
All right.
And how we got there, we can discuss.
All right, thank you. Pete, you're one of the best storytellers I know, hence I'm reluctant to ask you to tell a story because you will entertain us for way too long. But while you give a very, very brief reflection on the 90s and today, can I ask you to also, I think you know what I'm talking about how Dallas Morning News, with the story that you broke, published the first, and etc. You know what I'm talking about.
I think I do know what you're talking about, and I think that what might be described as letting a genie out of a bottle in terms of the way that news is covered. Besides all the bigger trends about the news media being under-resourced and being unable to do as good a job, there's a lot of pressure from the 24-hour news cycle, as we call it. You may recall the days, as I certainly do, at the beginning of my career in the 80s, when newspapers came out once or maybe a couple of times a day, but there was basically a deadline cycle that you aimed for. And we had just launched a web page, we being the newspaper I worked for in Dallas. And we were following that model, as everybody was, which was that at about 5 in the morning, about the same time the newspapers were hitting the stores and people's front porches, there would be an entirely new version of the paper that would be uploaded to the website. And so each morning you would read the news.
So if you had a great scoop, it was still not published on the web. You held it for the actual print.
Well, and there were some exceptions, but generally that was the case. And there was no thought was given to get it faster rather than, I mean, there was the competitive pressure of wanting to scoop your competition, but the idea of an hour earlier making a big difference just didn't exist. So,
And then something happened in Oklahoma City bombing.
right, you all remember, perhaps not in the level of detail that we, Americans do, but the Oklahoma City bombing happened. There was 2 defendants who were charged with the crime, one of them being a man named Timothy McVeigh, who's since been executed after he was convicted. But I was reporting full-time along with 3 other people, an example of the resources.
From the same newspaper.
From the same newspaper, and we had an apartment in the town where the trial was happening, and we had a bureau that we opened in the town where the bombing happened. We decided we were going to own this story. And through that process, I had leaked to me some internal defense documents that included an investigator's report in which he recounted how Timothy McVeigh had confessed and that he had said he wanted a large body count, which was, I mean, this is a big story. And so we were faced with a problem in that if we called, as we were compelled to do, if we called his lawyers and said, what is your response? Please explain, do the fair thing and contact them. There was a very real problem that he would run to the courthouse and get what is known as a prior restraint. That is, get a judge to say this will have an undue and improper effect on the trial, which those kinds of
Which would mean that other news outlets would get to the story also.
It would mean that, but
Yeah.
more than that, we would be involved in a big legal fight over whether we had the right to publish, and we would probably win that fight. But in the meantime, it would be a big mess, and that we didn't want. We
And
wanted
the editorial decision that you made.
Yeah. So as we were sitting around wrestling with this puzzle, the fellow who was running this new thing, the web page,
The World Wide Web.
said the World Wide Web, the interweb, says, well, why don't we just put the story out there in the middle of the day? As soon as you get get it out there, and it can't be restrained at that point. And we said, we can do that? And he said, yeah, it's not a problem. You write the story, we'll have it ready, and when you get the quotes, we'll plug them in, and boom, it's out on the web. And so we did that, and it was a very exhilarating time because in the newsroom, there were the major networks and CNN were on television monitors, and they were having their typical midday programming of soap operas and game shows and light things, and all of a sudden, boom, 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 the network anchors, the Dan Rathers of the day, broke in with this breaking news that the Dallas Morning News has just reported on their internet site that Timothy McVeigh has confessed, and it was a big deal.
So what you have in front of you now is the reporter that broke the story that was published on the web for the first time, instead of published in the press. Gina, during your years in D.C., have you noticed any difference? Your tenure there was about 8 years?
6 years.
6 years. Did you notice any difference even within that short time span?
Oh, for sure. I mean, when I arrived in DC as a correspondent to be stationed there for the Swedish radio, it was in 2007. There were a lot of differences and some similarities. I was thinking about it. I mean, at that time,
You mean between
in DC,
Sweden and America?
between now and then.
All right.
I'm thinking about the speculations about the candidates. In
Yeah.
2007 in DC, all the pundits were talking about a certain Hillary Clinton being the next president of the United States. And it turned out to be someone else. We were still talking about, I mean, in 2007, John Edwards was a respected politician. In 2007, John McCain was still a Republican war hero.
Yeah.
That's different. I came at a time when there was a lot of economic problems, turmoil in not only DC, but all of the US, with a crisis on Wall Street, panicking on Wall Street, with the auto industry falling down and being rescued by the Obama government, the first thing he had to deal with. So it was a very different time in many ways, and a very different election cycle, a very different
the
campaign.
media coverage of that very eventful year, how would that coverage look like if all those things happened now?
Oh,
The difference.
yeah.
Do you have
the
any
media,
thoughts on that?
there are many things to be said about the coverage, I think, about then Senator Obama's campaign, because the American media sort of fell in love with this young
Yes, they
candidate.
did.
And I think a lot of European leaders fell in love with him as well.
And maybe
I mean,
some European reporters.
and maybe some European reporters as well. But I wouldn't consider myself one of them.
No, I
try
agree.
to
I agree
stay
with that.
impartial, but I have to say that reporting in an environment where the approval ratings of then Senator Obama was 94% in Europe, I mean, that's there's something to be said about the environment in which we reported about his campaign.
Yeah.
And there's something to be said about the environment. If we talk about similarities between now and then and differences, there's something to be said about the political environment now in Europe toward Mr. Trump. It's the opposite. Europe has not fallen in love with Mr. Trump. That's
No,
to be sure.
that's probably a fair statement. Staffan, are you the bad guy? Are you? I mean,
like that position.
You left print behind in a very, very concrete way. You became the editor-in-chief of a news outlet that's never seen print, that doesn't in any way have ties to the tradition. How do you work differently, and do you think that you're part of a process that continue to break down old media, and can you be a good force, or are you necessarily what so many people fear, a force against an informed democracy?
I wouldn't say I'm that, but I think, I mean, I do work with as an outlet without print media, and I don't think that's a huge difference to work at Dagens Nyheter or Expressen or New York Post, because print is leaving behind, they're failing. So the main focus is the website on all these newspapers I mentioned. So in that sense, it's not that big difference for me. But also you get, I mean, I started out in 1994 as a journalist at Expressen, and that was pretty much before internet in a way. I mean, and I was London correspondent in 1997, and I didn't use the internet then, but it did exist, the internet. So I mean, I've done that part too. What I think now, it's the tempo is much more faster, of course, and the deadlines that Pete mentioned, it's deadline all the time. So in a way, it's more difficult to be a journalist, but in a way, I think it's more easy to be a journalist as well, because it's easier to get information, but it's also, I mean, you need to be even more skeptic, of course,
Yeah, I was
compared
going to
to
ask you,
before.
with deadline all the time, the risk that somebody else is going to write the story before you do might tempt you to not double check your sources, might tempt you to write your piece not as a stated fact, but it's been told that, etc. Just which, of course, to the reader doesn't matter whether the latest example was CNN's publication of this, the Russians possibly hold on Trump, where they did not do anything formally wrong, but still they did everything wrong. And why did that happen? Because of the news cycle. They had decided that now this will be published. Do you don't you face that risk all the time?
I agree, but it doesn't need necessarily to be wrong, because you can also, if you're really clear about it, if you really waiver, like a waiver, you know, you say this text will be updated, we're working on it, then you put the readers, they're in the process of the story, of the development of the story. So that doesn't need to be wrong. I mean, and this is if it's a breaking story, I would say.
Somebody was raped in that part of the city, and rumor has it that it was fill in the blank, some famous person. This has not been verified, and the story continues. Isn't the damage done? And,
Yeah,
did you do
I mean, you can always find those kind of cases, of course, but still, putting the readers as a part of the development, it doesn't need to be that wrong, actually. I mean, you need to be very clear that this is an unconfirmed story, but we're investigating it and stuff like that. But it's difficult to say. I say this is in a general, but you need to look at every story and judge by the time.
Yeah.
So you can't give. It's not like a manual you can use.
The way it used to be, I'm turning to you, Dave, now. A term coined in America is backroom politics, where really everything of import was decided by men between 60 and 75, smoking cigars, drinking bourbon in a room where nobody else was allowed. And then there was a pretense that there was actually a democratic process within the party, a democratic process between the political structure and the electorate. But really, everything went important, or very much of what was of import happened behind closed doors. What was good about that we miss today?
Well, what was good about it was that the people in the smoke-filled rooms probably had firsthand knowledge of the candidates that they were handpicking to run for their party's nomination. Now, the same, so you had a second filter on the political process.
The media and then the political, yeah.
Yes, or the political parties actually knew people and knew their character and had dealings with them and knew whether they would be a good president. And then you had the public who could weigh in via the election. Well, now it's basically the same process. It's somebody who can raise money, who can manipulate the media, who can put on a show, and he wins the primary, and he becomes the nominee of the party, then he wins the general election. And that's, I think we were better served in the smoke-filled room era when you had a second filter.
Right, and
Trump would have never made it through, obviously.
obviously not, yes.
The first process, he would never have made it through. He would have been the last one picked.
Pete, when you published this by now famous web article at the Dallas Morning News, did that immediately open the floodgates at your newspaper and in general? Or was there a process of inertia before this took over the media landscape? Or
Well,
did you
all the mechanisms were built
were you
around
the one who let the genie out of the bottle?
Well, I think to a degree inadvertently
You.
we did. Me personally, yes, with the intent that journalism would be destroyed.
Yeah.
No, I think that there inertia is a good word for it. All the sort of business and operational structures were built around the print news cycle and the notion that you would knock down trees, make paper. Once a day you would, or a couple times a day you would print these things, drive around and throw it on people's lawn. And so, and there was a lot of there was a lot of debt surrounding all this bricks and mortar and printing presses and paper.
What you didn't have was social media.
Yeah, there was no social media, but it's not a surprising evolution, but we wouldn't have predicted that.
Right.
The other thing that really hurt the traditional business model and has made the transition to a quality technology, a modern technological delivery of news, is that newspapers didn't think twice about how they were going to make money off of this new thing.
So when I read a book on the people that founded.
If I may, so everybody gave away their content,
Right.
and that was a huge blow to the business model.
I read a book, just this my own comment here, on how Twitter was founded. And what was so stunning about it was that the people who invented, founded, and marketed Twitter, they didn't think twice. There isn't one piece of reflection on what impact would this have. They just threw it out there without knowing at all. And it seems that when old media moved into the World Wide Web, it was the same kind of process, without any deliberation on what are we doing as far as journalism, which is not a question, just a reflection that I think is quite interesting. Public service, Gina, that you represent, has, I think it's fair to say, as it's assigned to facilitate the democratic process. If democracy is not only casting your ballot, but also a process of deliberation where people discuss and people inform themselves so that they can make an informed choice between candidates or parties, then public service has as its assignment to make that happen. Are you losing that battle now? Are you following the lead of the World Wide Webs, the internets and the social media's pressure on you? I noticed now the last media inquest from the government says that public service in Sweden is now going to move to the internet as a new venue, not only radio and TV. Are you keeping up with your assignment, or are you losing the battle?
I think we're definitely keeping up with our assignment, and I think the need for that is bigger than ever.
Which are two different things.
Yes, but I think we are. And if I look at our audience numbers and our confidence numbers, not at least, I mean, we're up there with Systembolaget. I don't know if that's good, good or bad, but
that's the
but we're up
monopoly
there.
selling
That's
liquor and wine in Sweden.
Exactly. I mean, it's very Swedish. But that's the confidence numbers for the Swedish radio are really, really good, and we are very happy to see that our ratings are really good as well. But we need to obviously adapt to the new media landscape, and we need to find out a journalistic professional way of how to cover this new media landscape. I mean, Donald Trump is our first Twitter president, right? Just like... But I think we had a discussion in our newsroom, on our podcast actually, yesterday, about how to cover Donald Trump's tweets. I mean, are we going to... Some argue that we can't obsess over every little, sometimes stupid things that he puts out there, and sometimes he's just trying to steer away from something.
Must you do that? Must you
Exactly.
not do that? Isn't it news
argue
per se if the president does that?
I agree, and I argue that we have to. We have to cover his Twitter account, and we have to cover his White House, and we have to cover the Congress, and it's actually, I mean, the big challenge is to do both. Because if the president speaks, whatever the platform is, we need to cover it. That's news. It's newsworthy.
If he writes, "I washed my socks this morning by hand," that is so weird that a president would write something like that you would have to cover it.
We would probably say something about it, at least in our podcast.
Yeah.
Maybe not on the 45 on the big.
Right.
But I have to add also that I'm sorry, that the challenge is to do this and to cover and uncover the really big journalistic stories that are out there right now. I mean, in the US it's obvious, and even here in Sweden, with people feeling hurt by job loss, or by not being empowered, or feeling that they don't have power enough to change things. We have to cover that and to give them a voice and cover his Twitter account.
Yeah, but
the challenge is to do both.
Before I let you in, Staffan, it could be argued that those very people are the ones that don't really care about the media that you represent.
But I think that if we give them, if we listen to them, if we are out there, report about them, report about their kitchen table issues, then they will listen to us. And we have to make ourselves important to them, obviously.
I love your optimism.
Staffan.
Yeah, two things. First, it wouldn't be that weird if he wrote this thing about the socks. I mean, that's in line with Trump, I would say, President-elect Trump. But Gina mentioned, and it's interesting, you know, he uses Twitter to shift the focus of the stories, of the news cycle. And I have an example which I was given by my good friend and former colleague, André Assarsson. you know, Trump University, it broke out the news that they owe $25 million. And this was about to be big news. But the very same day, President-elect Trump attacked the cast of Hamilton, the musical in New York, because they had...
Because they booed Vice
and
President-elect
they held a
Pence,
speech to Vice President-elect Pence. So that's an example of how he shifts the focus. But I'm not certain he does this like big strategic thinking. I think he goes a lot with his guts and his instincts. And that makes it even more tricky somehow to foresee.
Yeah. Do you, as, again, editor-in-chief of a web-based news outlet, how do you use social media in relation to your reporting and presenting of your news? How important a part is that?
That's an interesting question, because we just, like 1.5 months ago or something, we hired a very skilled female. Her name is Caroline Buffa, and she's really an expert on this. So we work really hard with Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and stuff like that. And that's one of the... I started out in October, we should mention. So, but that was one of my first like strategic thoughts. We need to be on social media because it happens there.
Does that mean that you have to move into the swamp where we could read that the Pope endorsed Trump, spread to millions and millions of voters?
No, but you shouldn't see social media as a swamp in general.
No, that's why I phrased it as a
there's
question.
always swamps, but it's the same with printed media. I don't know if you remember this magazine, but it was called A Ding Ding Värld.
Yeah, you see them all over these days.
Yeah, we do. But I mean, it's the social media. It's a tool for communication, and people communicate whatever they want. But then you have to sort it out. And I think that's really important part of the journalistic work, and especially for Gina and her colleagues.
The media is the message, as they say. Dave, you pointed.
Well, of course, Trump uses the tweet to set the agenda and to go over the heads of the media, and he's very successful about it. He's the first one. Who knows whether it'd be the last one? But from a journalistic standpoint, is that so bad? I mean, which would you rather have? Trump's thoughts as filtered through aides and smoothed over, or would you want to see him what he's actually doing in the morning with a narcissistic self getting mad at somebody? I mean, as a journalist, you want to see the real thing, don't you? And so is it necessarily terrible that he uses a tweet?
Maybe not for the bottom line for the media organizations, but is it good for democracy?
You know, there's some developments that may not be obvious here. They may be happening in a similar fashion, but that are because the news media doesn't necessarily like to report on itself. There's a resistance to that. There's some things that, as we were discussing our program today, came up that somebody suggested I should mention, and they're kind of optimistic notes. That put this Trump win not in the mode of being assumed to be the worst thing ever, but as part of an evolution in our institutions. And you know, bad things, if you see them that way, happen, and good things can result. So in that category, you should know that I and other former journalists have been approached by people who in news organizations that are wrestling with the business model, trying to preserve the conventions and the language of journalism in its traditional form, which is deliberately objective and fair and thoughtful and deep. And there's a concern that so many people have left the business who were good at doing that the natural succession and training and apprenticeship has broken down. Many small papers where people learn the trade have folded. So how do they do that? Well, there is a conscious effort going on to recruit people back as player coaches so that the language doesn't become like Navajo code talk and completely lost, evaporates like the dodo. So that's going on. The other thing that's happening is that people who think about these things recognize that it's not just the internet. It's also the notion of publicly traded companies owning newspapers rather than local families, which was the old model.
So they have to go for the profits.
They have to. It's a legal compulsion in the U.S. system that you have to maximize measurable bottom line dollars. And so people are experimenting with other business models that don't have that same mandate. And specifically, there are nonprofit organizations that are raising money from concerned citizens and funding journalism that is less competitive, that is cooperative with existing newspapers. There are families and rich individuals who are taking over newspapers and trying to do
all of these are good people's efforts to maintain a situation or create a situation where there's an informed electorate. I was thinking about what you said, Jenna, how you still produce really grounded and high quality media and public service. I agree with that. I also agree with what you said, that you were not one of those falling in love with Barack Obama. But producing this high quality journalism is not necessarily the same thing as getting the ratings. And there could be a case made that the ratings for what you describe and for public service will not be able to keep up. It's not like we've seen the heyday of this development today or the end of it. It could actually be, now it's Donald Trump. 8 years from now, it can be Ted Nugent or Michael Moore or Jack Black or Beyonce.
Steve Harvey.
Yeah. So Tom Hanks is thinking about it. So we haven't seen the end of it. And can your in-depth reporting on the confirmation of some secretary by Trump compete with a picture of Richard Gere naked on the beach in ratings? I mean, the bad forces are getting better at what they're doing also.
Well, I'd like to think that there's a demand for both, actually. I mean, I
Won't
look
that
at
create an elite then?
I look at websites with gossip, and I read TMZ, and but I also listen to the Swedish radio and to NPR, and I watch a lot of great American journalism. I mean, there are different channels and different needs,
Yeah, but you're
right?
not a coal miner who lost her job
No,
2
that's
years
right.
ago.
That's right. But I'm going back to, I have to stay. I mean, we are not chasing ratings per se. That's not our mission. But we need to have high ratings enough to stay relevant, right?
Right,
As a
yeah.
public service company. If not, there's no meaning in what we do. And I think the same goes. I mean, there's reason to be self-critical for media after this election campaign in the US, and I think there's reason to be cautious even for Swedish media when it comes to the upcoming Swedish election. When it comes to covering, I mean, we can't be part of the bubble in DC or the bubble in Stockholm and the inner cities and staying with the establishment and
When you
reporting
say
on their
that, do you
views.
mean we have been?
I think when you look at the coverage of the US election campaign, let me stay at that top. I won't criticize the Swedish political.
Your Swedish
that's not my
colleagues,
expertise.
yeah.
But when it comes to the US reporting, I think there was a sense that the East Coast established media was seen as part of the establishment and not being out there enough among people that they would report for.
Yeah.
And I think there is a risk. I can't say for sure that was the case. We have to see what the studies say and so on and so forth. But that was certainly a feeling among many voters. And that's bad enough, I mean.
So
If that is the sense, we have to do something about our reporting.
So from Staffan, Gina, and Pete, we hear a certain optimism that media will be able to come together to realize the trap they fell in and to pull themselves out of it and deliver the way serious media should. There is another, if we look to the future and we hope that it's not all going to hell, there is another possibility, and that is that the political parties come together somehow, that they talk themselves together to not exploit in the worst possible way the populist communication channels and the populist arguments and that they try to be, that they understand they have to be anti-Trump, and that they can reach over the aisle informally to do this. Is that possible? A development like that possible, Dave?
Well, if it is, it would fight a trend of 60 or so years going the other way to be more, the parties are weakening.
But what we're seeing in media today is fighting that trend.
Yes, well, that's true. But the parties, it could turn around, and the reason that the Democrats got a relatively more respectable candidate this year, although she turned out to be a obviously loser, was that they retained more control over the process of nominating than the Republicans did, who just threw it out there. And so I'm not optimistic about that. I'm optimistic generally about the news media's ability to recover from this situation. There's always going to be a market among a segment of society, hopefully a large one, for quality news and information, solid information that's factual. And the question for the media now is, how do we finance it? And if you can solve that problem, unfortunately the internet started free, right? And people are used to getting things free, but you got to get paid through the, you got to get paid.
The media that Pete and you and Jenna and Staffan to describe is maybe something that will just reinforce the feeling of there being an elite. And what Trump did was making that elite media his enemy, and by that rallying tens of millions behind him. So why would that change? Why, if you manage to pull yourself together and produce this quality media, why wouldn't the next candidate be able to pull off the same trick as Trump did?
I don't mean to be overly optimistic. I think that our country, all the estates of traditionally considered...
And in Europe, I can add.
Yeah, I mean, the three estates of government are all in turmoil. We have a split Supreme Court. Who knows where that's going to go? Congress is dysfunctional. We have a president unlike any other that we've ever had before. And the traditional regarded fourth estate of government, the press, has existential challenges that nobody has come up with a solution to. But what happened with Trump was that he tapped a deep frustration with all of these estates on the part of people. And if it works the way I hope, all will respond in a way that makes it so that...
But it's not that he tapped that, it's how he did it, right? The media perspective.
Right, but I think that everybody will respond. And that's why I try to view this as perhaps something that nudges our processes forward and makes them better.
Because 20 years ago, a presidential candidate could have made the same arguments that Trump did. And it wouldn't, the electorate wouldn't respond.
Oh, yeah, there was
the reason today was that he had outlets that were not there 20 years ago.
He's an entertainer, right? So he used, I mean, I would argue that he didn't, I mean, not only did he paint the media as the enemy, he also used the media as some kind of props on his election, on his meetings, at his rallies, where the journalists who covered the rallies were fenced in this little cage and put in the middle of the rally, and he would point at us and at them and you know, talk about them as being fake news and fake media, and look at them, and they won't even show how many of us are here.
But what happened?
So he used them as a kind of as props in a kind of entertainment way, as an event.
But hasn't media responded to Trump in the same poor way that he treats them? The story you're referring to is when he shut down CNN's reporter.
Not only that, I mean, even before that.
What happened then, because that is something that's been widely reported in Sweden, how during his first press conference in several months, Donald Trump refused to give CNN a question and called them fake media. What he was referring to was that CNN had published and hinted at a report that was patently false, that said that Donald Trump had rented the same hotel room in Moscow that Barack and Michelle Obama stayed in, and then rented prostitutes to sit on that bed and pee only because the Obama slept in it. That's a disgusting story
CNN didn't
and false.
publish the
They
report,
did not
though.
publish the document, but they referred to the document, and then immediately it was out there. So they were actually the first to publish that piece of news, even if they were not the first to publish the document. So what kind of reporting is that from one of the most respected news outlets in America when they go that low?
But I don't want to defend CNN here, but in a way, I mean, they reported that President-elect Trump and President Obama was briefed by the security agencies about this matter, about this report. That's basically what they reported. And if CIA decides to brief President-elect Trump and President Obama about this report, which the report looks very false, I admit, but still, that's news in a way, I think.
Yeah.
You know, attacking the press is not new in Republican politics. I was in Washington in the 70s when Spiro Agnew, who was Nixon's first vice president, made a career out of it, and of course he came to ruin. And but it's been a staple of Republican politics ever since, really. But of course, Trump's elevated to a completely new level. But here's the point I want to make: the situation we have now with Trump in open warfare with the press corps, it's chaos. It cannot continue. I don't know exactly how it's going to continue, but this is insane that he is attacking and making the most personal assault. And maybe, I mean, I've always said for almost 2 years now that any day now Trump will come to his senses and act like a normal person. And of course, I've been wrong for 2 years. But maybe after he's inaugurated, somebody will say, you can't do this anymore. But I do know that something has to happen. He cannot be in this situation where the people who are covering him are totally out to get him, and vice versa.
The fight between Spiro Agnew and the media, Agnew had to resign because of reporting, and if he had had an amicable relationship to the media, maybe the development would have been a different one. Will media force Trump out of office?
Yeah. At this stage, Trump is winning, so I don't think so. But I mean, he's pretty well in there for 4 years.
Yeah.
I can't tell you what's going to happen.
What I refer to is that Obama was unimpeachable no matter what he did, because he had strong support in his party. The media loved him. The people, his ratings were high. So it was practically impossible to impeach him no matter what he did, almost. Whereas Donald Trump might only have to stumble in order to the process to
there
start
would be
rolling.
people interested in getting him out, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Okay. We're going to go to Q&A, so this is going to be very brief.
I'm 100% sure he won't change. He won't change. He will be like this. I'm 100% sure. He won't change. I'm sorry.
Well, it's been a media strategy that has worked, so if it works as a president, why would he not?
Well, more importantly, it's not a conscious strategy. It's an intuitive course, and people don't change.
It's who he is.
And he certainly, one of his characteristics is not taking counsel and following his internal compass wherever it may lead. And so I think that the notion that somebody could prevail upon him with logic and traditional wisdom about I don't think that's his character, is that he will listen and change, or he would have already.
No, I think he's very intuitive and has an instinct for survival, and I think that if it comes to that, he will take counsel. I remember,
and those qualities in him would have either disqualified him 2 decades ago or been irrelevant. But because of the media situation, these qualities become highly relevant. Now, we're going to go to Q&A. I'm going to ask the 4 of you yes or no question. Yes or no. Are we going to be okay?
Yes.
yes, we'll be safe. We'll be safe.
Yes. I mean.
Yes.
No. All right. Where do we have Alexander? Here with the microphone. I also forgot to say, if you want to be anonymous, if you don't want to give your name, of course you don't have to, but But if you have no reason to not give your name, please do it.
Hi, I'm Maria Ranka. I'm former CEO of this place, and I'm with the Chamber of Commerce in Stockholm. Thank you for interesting comments. Did any one of you see or watch from the World Economic Forum the U.S. Outlook with Anthony Scaramucci the other day? Because when Dave talked about spin and how you learned that word, that came to mind. And you can't answer the question because I was curious in your views on that talk. It's a highly interesting talk. It's just 30 minutes, so watch it. And by the way, it's brilliant. You can watch everything from Davos online. But it's like, you know, listening to this, he's a smart guy, Scaramucci. And, you know, when he describes the president-elect as one of the most, you know, brilliant, thoughtful, smart, you know, he with the ability to understand people's psychology and so on and so forth. To me, it's like just in my brain, I'm probably not intelligent enough, but it's like syntax error. So, but it's brilliant, and it is an interesting and sort of fun talk as well, and smart talk. But it's, you know, it's the level of spin. So I'm completely lost.
When you have to tell people that your boss actually is smart, then you probably have a problem. No more questions? There you go.
My name is Dan Sonesson, and I would like to pose a question to everyone in the panel. The fact that a politician or a candidate today can address the general public without going through the media filter that Dave described, is that a problem?
I don't think it's a problem per se. I mean, I think that presidents have always done that in different ways. President Obama has certainly done it with his videos and his Facebook clips and his
Talk show appearances.
his speeches. This is just another platform. It's just another platform, but it's the way. I mean, it's more of the way that he's tweeting. It's not what he's. The fact that he's using Twitter is not a problem per se, I think.
In a way, it's I mean, it's more democracy that the media doesn't have all the power to communicate. So in that sense, it's good with this social media, I think. And of course, it's a threat to the industry we are in. But still, in that sense, I think it's good.
I think that people assume that a greater level of affection and respect for Trump than actually exists. I think that this isn't an example of the mechanism you describe having a result that is going to be repeated time and time again with candidates who don't meet the traditional criteria, whose greatest qualification is that they've never done anything close to what they're going to now do at the highest level in the world. I don't think that that's axiomatic that it will happen that way. People respected his message about draining the swamp, about doing away with the establishment, and his completely iconoclastic approach. And I don't think that a result that might be weird necessarily means that the mechanism by which it was achieved is discredited. I think that it's probably a good thing, it's a changing thing, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, I think you'll be judged on his results, which are pretty good so far, even though he's not particularly popular by historic standards, but the stock market has been going up. They're all sorts of signs of economic optimism in the country. And in the end, he'll be judged as success or failure on what he produces. Now, the question is, does this Twitter business get in the way of him producing what he needs to produce? And I think he's smart enough. I'll tell you this, he's a very bright guy. He chooses to speak at a 4th grade level. It's not just an accident. He's not a dummy. He doesn't say horrible, sad, you know, that sort of thing. When he's talking with ordinary people in his business and so forth, he doesn't talk that way. He chooses to communicate at a level that a lot of people understand, and that's one of his geniuses. I think that eventually he'll find a way to be more palatable to people like us.
Yes, my name is Hans Jepsen. I'm a consultant, but I have a certain background in politics too. I have a question about leaks, because in Washington and in Stockholm, journalists often like to report about leaks and rumors, what happened inside the corridors of power. At the same time, that is difficult because sources normally want to be anonymous. And it is also prone to be subject to, well, manipulation. That is actually, it's not correct. The battle between the foreign minister and the defense minister is not for real, but somebody has an interest of spreading that news. With the Trump administration, I think there will be ample opportunities for rumors about internal conflicts. How do you look upon that?
Sure.
Of course, I think that's a brilliant question, because journalism, to my way of thinking, good journalism is getting material out there that the people in power don't necessarily want you to have or to spread. And so, unfortunately, in Washington, they've discovered a way over the last two administrations, Bush and Obama, to prevent leaks out of the White House. And when I was there in the Reagan administration, there were plenty of leaks. And it was there was a lot of information coming out. And how the one optimistic thing about the Trump administration is the press, who was very sycophantic towards Obama, has suddenly decided that it's time to get in there and really do some reporting. And reporting often involves leaks. I mean, if you depend on the press secretary for all your information, you're in pretty rough shape. And so I'm hoping that the reporters will get busy, develop sources, like you're talking about, and filter those sources so that they can figure out whether they're being manipulated or not, and actually do some real reporting. I told Roland last night, I judge a White House reporting contest for the Ford Library, the presidential library, and the submissions recently have been terrible. They're terrible. It's all handouts from the Obama press office, and it's like every report could be approved by Obama. And so I'm hoping that there'll be some real reporting under the Trump administration. The press seems motivated to do it. Maybe we'll get some real information about what's going on in the government.
A follow-up on that about leaks, because you've been on both the good side and the evil side. When you were the press secretary for the vice president, and also in the management of Senate campaigns after that, how easy was it to manipulate the reporters using this instrument?
Well, it was very difficult. I had to be paid very highly to do those sorts of things. It's very, very complicated work.
Well, I think that one of the fundamental just truths about journalism is that people didn't have motives. You would never get stories. The art of journalism involves understanding those motives and being able to find the truth and to filter out, and so you have to. There's a manipulation in both directions. Getting people to tell you stuff is a game of manipulation. But my worry is that the skills to be able to sort these things out and to even realize that they need to be sorted out are kind of dying. And my hope is that that the demand for good information will keep those skills alive, and that good reporting will be the order of the day.
So rumors instead of leaks. Now, my clock here is 1 minute to 1. So one more question, and we're gonna be done.
Hi, I'm Roy Rorsman from the youth wing of the Liberal Party. And my question is for anyone who wants to answer it. And how do you report fake news, and especially fake news sponsored by foreign powers to disrupt domestic and foreign policy? Because, as I don't remember who said it, but if it's newsworthy, then you have to report it. But at the same time, you need to make clear that it's not trustworthy. And how do you balance those things?
Gino, are you?
It was me saying that. I think you meant you can have a disclaimer if it's an ongoing story. It's a disclaimer saying this is not confirmed yet. But Gina, please.
Oh, we shouldn't report fake news, obviously. I mean, I completely agree with what you said, that we need to be professional fact checkers and go through what are the sources and compare and fact
What
check.
if the source is so
it's
interesting that
Yeah,
that
but
it's
I mean,
interesting that the source, if Trump says something that is fake, you have to report it.
Yes,
and
and
then
then we have
millions
to
of people will
fact check,
trust
and
Trump
it's-
instead of you.
And
Always
let's
say-
face it, Trump is not our average Republican president, and he has repeatedly said things that turn out to be false. I mean, we have seen that over and over again. And then we have to report, and that is sometimes mistaken for being partial in the reporting, when it's actually just reporting that, look, this is not factually true. And we need to do that over and over again. And I'm worried that we will have to keep doing that during his presidency.
As a rule, we never continue past 1 o'clock, since I know a lot of you are here at your lunch breaks, and it is now 1 o'clock. So I want to thank you all for a very interesting discussion. I hope you felt the same. I want to thank all of you for coming. Timbro Medieinstitut will continue with seminars, and there will be very interesting books out there for you to browse through after this seminar. So thank you very much for coming.